Where did you get that?
What, Marleman's walking stick?
It's not a walking stick. It's a hither-thither staff. Hither. Thither.
What the f***? Is this allowed? What the f***? Is that allowed?
I remember when the Orange Box first came out, and out of all the games in it, Portal was the one that grabbed me and didn't let go. It felt like I was playing something that I couldn't even have imagined. Portal left me wanting more, but for years, there really wasn't much like it around. But now, over 15 years later, there's dozens of games that have picked up on what made Portal so special. Many of these games are awesome in their own right, though, I'll be honest, not many, if any, have really come close to matching Portal. The key to Portal-like game design isn't really about creating super tough puzzles. It's about making puzzles and mechanics that make the player feel clever, even if the solutions are just actually staring them in the face. As usual, my goal here is to shine a light on games I like, so you might find something here that you might have otherwise missed. Typically, I enjoy highlighting lesser known titles compared to many of the ones featured in this video. However, while maybe you and I might be familiar with certain games, there's a broader audience out there that remains less connected and might not have come across some of these. In this video, I'm only going to talk about 6 games, though I've got more than 20 other first-person puzzle games lined up that I want to cover eventually. So think of this as a volume 1 of a series that I plan on continuing. Alright, let's just start it off now with a really great one. The Entropy Centre is a neat, recently released first-person puzzle game that revolves around time reversal. You play as Arya, who finds herself on a lunar-based scientific station called the Entropy Centre, a moon base built so scientists can observe Earth and then hit a literal rewind button after world-ending disasters occur. When they're forced to turn back time on Earth, they'll then fill in the world leaders on what's about to go wrong, so they can try to course correct and hopefully avoid destruction. As for Arya, she wakes up with amnesia, which is a pretty big trope for a game of this type, and as she explores an abandoned Entropy Centre, she finds a device that lets her reverse time on a small scale. Inside the device is Astra, a comedic AI helper. Together, they tackle a bunch of puzzle rooms that, when completed, juice up the center in hopes of sorting out their situation. Now, the gameplay loop is pretty typical for a first-person puzzler. You'll solve your way through a string of puzzle rooms, occasionally spiced up with a few set pieces. The puzzles are a mix of different mechanics and objects, each with their own quirks. The game's really smart about how it introduces new mechanics, never piling on too many to keep straight. But I do think the game feels a little stretched thin overall. Trimming the game down by just removing one puzzle from each of the sections could have kept things punchier. What the Entropy Centre really nails is the game's sense of humor and vibe.
Warning, do not stand underneath falling debris, unless the intention is to get crushed.
It's not exactly reinventing the comedy wheel, but it totally captures the witty and clever style that you know from the Portal series, which many have tried to capture and most have failed. The game also does a good job of changing things up visually. You won't be stuck in bland puzzle rooms for the whole game. The scenery shifts and it's a nice breath of fresh air. I highly recommend the Entropy Centre. The story's gripping, the time-twisting gameplay is super solid, and its humor hits a hard spot to hit. Sure, I wish it was a little bit better paced, but overall, this game's totally worth sticking with. The Turing Test is a puzzle game with mechanics based around using a gun that slurps up energy balls and shoots them out to power up a bunch of different pieces of machinery, like magnets, bridges, and doors. Plus, there's also another mechanic that spices things up later into the game, but that kinda qualifies as a spoiler, so just trust me, it's awesome for puzzle solving. You play as Ava, who is an astronaut being held in cryosleep in orbit around Europa. But when the crew down on the moon's base is in danger, the station's AI Tom wakes you up to go down to save them. The story covers some interesting ethical and philosophical stuff in a nuanced and intriguing way. It digs into some deep questions about what it means to be human and how AI fits into that conversation. It's very reminiscent to 2001: A Space Odyssey and HAL 9000. The storytelling is top-notch with voice acting that really brings it to life.
The ISA has made the executive decision that you report to the surface post-haste. You are our emergency response.
The structure is just like most of the others in this video. You'll be working your way through a bunch of puzzle rooms one after another. One extremely insignificant thing that I really appreciated here though was that you have the ability to run. Something that you usually don't see in this type of game. It might seem like not a big deal, but for some reason, just the option to affect your movement speed in a game, even if it's not that useful, is like my personal "can you pet the dog?" I highly recommend the Turing Test. I think it has really great puzzles and a thoughtful story I think you should check out. Also, it's published by Square Enix, and I think that's pretty weird. There are 3 different versions of the first QUBE game. The original release solely focused on puzzles, devoid of any narrative elements. Then with the Director's Cut edition, the one I'm covering here, they added a storyline and a soundtrack, and then more recently, there was a 10th anniversary edition released that modernized and improved the general presentation and added some new puzzles. I haven't played that newest version, but based on what I see online, it appears to be the one you should pick up if you're coming to this game for the first time now. QUBE's storyline is really compelling. It's hard to imagine the original version without it. You play as another amnesiac, but this time you're in a massive cube-filled puzzle complex, and as you play, communications are coming in telling you that you're an astronaut tasked with stopping a giant mass of alien cubes from hitting Earth, and that you have to solve these puzzles to get them to break off and fall apart. But that's not the only narrative that you're being sold. You also get messages from somebody who's freaking out, saying that you're actually just trapped in an underground lab and you're being tested. The way these two stories intertwine is impressive, and the great voice performances really leave you unsure on who to trust.
You, listen. I know you can hear me down there. She's lying to you. She's a liar. You're not where they say you are.
But for the gameplay and puzzle solving, your main tools are your gloves that give you the ability to affect the puzzle rooms by interacting with different colored cubes that have unique traits. But I'm sure you already figured that out from just watching the gameplay, so I'm not going to get too deep into it. But like Portal, many of the puzzles are about physics, and usually about getting from A to B. It starts simple, but it slowly increases the complexity at a really good pace. The balance between frustration and challenge here is struck perfectly. You won't be red in the face, but you'll be hooked. I highly recommend QUBE Director's Cut, but that said, the 10th anniversary release seems to be the one to really pick up now. The story and the mix of clever puzzles make it a real standout. Based on what I've read online, most folks seem to agree that QUBE 2 is the stronger game between the two QUBE games. However, I gotta admit, QUBE 2 left me a tad disappointed. The changes they made to the mechanics compared to the first game were a bit of a drag for the first half of the game, and honestly, my first impression wasn't great. But once you push past that, the second half really kicks it up a notch, and things are pretty good. I'm not going to dive into QUBE 2's story at all here because I would spoil the first game, and I just recommended that. That said though, I didn't really care for the story in QUBE 2 at all. The tension that made up the first game was really exciting, but it's totally gone here, and everything that this game tries to do, it just didn't work at all for me. The gameplay in QUBE 2 was tweaked, and it just feels far more constricting than the first game. At least for the beginning. You're limited to just one color block of each color, and honestly, the controls felt a little clunky to me. I was playing with a controller, and some of the time it felt like I was wrangling more with the controls than the actual puzzles. I found the first half to be a bit of a drag, but if you can put up with it, the second half is really where things start to shine. It took me about half of the game to find a control setup that worked well enough for me, and that's also when the game finally tosses away those training wheels that just stayed on far too long. Like an hour or two too long. Even with the game getting better, it still wasn't enough to outshine my love for the original QUBE. So yeah, I'm still recommending it, although it's a gentle recommendation. If you're interested in the first game, you could probably just pass on this if you really want to. Now these last two games step a little bit beyond the usual Portal-style clones, yet you can still trace a clear line from Portal to these games. That said, out of all of the non-Portal games in this genre, Superliminal is easily my favorite. Despite being someone who often doesn't replay games, I've gone through Superliminal 3 times since its release. It's a first-person puzzle game that's all about perspective and optical illusions. Just like how Portal wowed me initially, Superliminal had the same initial magical impact. The story here is more of a side note, and even after 3 playthroughs, I had to look up the plot for this video. Apparently, you're in a dream therapy program, but the gameplay mechanics are so engrossing that they push the story to the background for me. That said though, the game's ending still delivers a really powerful message that I found quite heartfelt and meaningful, even separate from the narrative. Describing Superliminal's gameplay is a bit of a challenge, but if I had to give it a shot, I'd say it's a string of puzzle-like experiences that are closer to a trippy modern art museum rather than the Portal-esque testing facilities. In Superliminal, you're constantly faced with impossible problems, and the only way forward is through equally impossible solutions. The magical thinking that you need to use is similar to something like dream or cartoon logic. Superliminal is an absolute must-play. If you haven't played Superliminal, I absolutely think you should, and even if you have, I think you should play it again. My last recommendation here will be the shortest one, because it kinda speaks for itself. Manifold Garden takes the Portal formula and gives it a mind-bending MC Escher twist. You'll navigate through impossible, never-ending spaces and structures, solving puzzles as you go. You use different colored blocks to manipulate gravity, transforming walls and ceilings into walkable terrain. While there's no elaborate story, honestly it's not really even needed. The vibes this game throws out are absolutely fantastic. It's like an incredible fusion of art and programming where visuals and mathematics meet. Manifold Garden is one of those rare games that truly showcases the immense power of video games as a creative medium. I highly recommend checking it out. As I mentioned earlier, consider this video a first installment. I'll be returning to explore more games like these down the line. So if there's an awesome first-person puzzle game you think I shouldn't overlook, feel free to share your recommendations in the comments. Also, if you enjoyed this video, I've got a bunch of others that I think would be right up your alley. And if you're into discovering games you might have otherwise missed, join the 408 others and subscribe. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Thank you for watching.